But these three countries that we've just heard from the U.S. ambassadors, Bulgaria, Serbia, North Macedonia, are in a tight spot on energy dependence right now. And so let me jump back, if I might, to Ambassador Mustafa in Sofia, if we could. How much do you see? I mean, given its extreme dependence on Gazprom, on a Russian source, whether nuclear or through gas, how much do you see new LNG exports and the use of these terminals in the region versus where the EU is really headed, trying to focus on renewables and green finance? How do you see sort of a pathway to diversification for Bulgaria that's actually viable when you look at the details and you're trying to follow through for impact when these things take time, but you're focused on the next couple of years? What's the most viable pathway for Bulgaria?
So thank you. That's a great question. So I had mentioned these spot purchases that took place this past winter. In order for the Bulgarians to have done those spot purchases, they needed to book capacity at Revithousa. They needed a license. When they were looking at this year, capacity at Revithousa was booked. They didn't have a license. And so even for the Bulgarians, they're realizing just how important Alexandroupolis is, because not only have they taken a 20% ownership stake, but also booked the 20% capacity. So they will, for the first time, have the ability to store LNG, bring from different sources. They're looking ahead and realizing that even within Bulgaria, their internal storage facility at Chirin needs to be enlarged. So they are already looking forward because they know it will take years. And they have a contract with Azerbaijan, which is scheduled to initiate later this year for 1 billion cubic meters. They were hoping to bring that in via the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector. Since that isn't complete, they're now having to find alternate routes. But the point is, they have that contract already. And as they're looking at their capacity in Alexandroupolis, they're hoping to buy 0.5 billion cubic meters. And again, whether that's from the US, whether that's from another source, the important point is that it won't be Gazprom. So that's important for all of us to look at. That new contract won't start until January of 2023. So we're working now for something that is in 2023. As I mentioned, again, the nuclear fuel, we're looking at trying to get alternate nuclear fuel here. We've been working on this for years. If we're successful, if we follow the details, that will commence in 2024 at the earliest. So it's taking that longer term view, and as my friend Jeff Pyatt says, having that strategic patience. He was involved in the early days of TAP, and I remember when people would say it was a pipe dream, and look where it is now. He was one of the people who was advocating for that. So with all of these projects, it's looking ahead. And now with the Green Deal, where we think Bulgaria really needs to focus is on these coal plants that are in the center of the country and the direction that it will take. Will it go for clean coal technology? The U.S. Department of Energy has clean coal technology, which will lower the emissions. Or will it, again, go to convert those big coal power plants into gas, which would add yet another 1 billion cubic meters? So this is where the forward planning is extremely important because as we're talking about diversification now, it will be years before we actually see it.
Long-term process. I'm going to go back to Serbia. Ambassador Godfrey, you mentioned 70% production from lignite coal, the pollution in Belgrade. One of the things that President Vučić has been championing, Ambassador Burns mentioned this, is this idea of a regional integrated economic space in the Western Balkans, among the Western Balkan six, as a way to better leverage a larger market, as a way to better leverage EU recovery funds. How do you see President Vučić's initiative to promote this regional economic effort and the EU's sort of green finance options out there? Do you see this as a viable pathway to accelerate Serbia's efforts to reduce its dependency on Gazprom?
So the answer is, I hope so, but I fear not. And I'd like to pull in what Hero was just speaking about in terms of timelines. We're talking about 2023, 2024 before any of these options are available in places like Sofia. Serbia's on the other end of the line, so things have to be sorted out in other places before they can get to Serbia. But you made the very good point that Serbia's power generation is 70% dependent on lignite coal. So there's space there to bring in more renewables. And we think that Serbia plans to do that. And they are doing a good job of working on renewables, both with the EU. They're getting some funds there, obviously not a member state, an accession state, so the levels are lower. But we are also doing our best to help with this, and not just through the USAID plans, but also we hope through the Development Finance Corporation, who's going to bring, we think, new assets to the region. But even if those renewables are increased, they're not going to touch the 70% level, which is where we really need to work on. And Serbia was counting on increasing its gas proportion. That would greatly reduce its pollution problem here, and it would be much less expensive. And for them, the loss of Turk Stream 2 is going to be very bitter. And it's not just because they were counting on it, but they've also already made a lot of the investment. And it's a tough pill for them to swallow. They did commit in Washington to greater diversity, and we expect that is going to probably be focused in the near term anyway on greener and renewables and things like that with EU and other support. Now, as far as what Vučić calls the mini Schengen and improving trade in the region, that's a real goal, and it's something that we support strongly. And it's my expectation that this is going to make things more efficient. It's going to allow more trade here in the region, where these states can be competitive with each other rather than competing with countries that are just out of their weight class. So it's my expectation that that's going to be helpful for the economies. I'm not exactly sure how much that's going to contribute to the energy diversity challenge that Serbia faces. I do think, though, that the more we can bring down the cost of LNG in the region to make it really competitive with the Gazprom heroin needle, it would be very much in the interests of improving motivation for diversity here in Serbia.
Turn back to Skopje and Ambassador Burns, and then I'm going to come to Ambassador Pyatt to wrap this off with a few key questions given the centrality of Greece looking to the Southeast and Eastern Med. But Ambassador Burns, first, let me close out in Skopje. You mentioned this is among the smallest markets, the most vulnerable. Do you see either in the wake of a Prespa agreement and greater economic opportunities with Greece, or even in the context of what Zaev and Penderovsky have been committed to, a regional economic effort in the Balkans? Do you see space for private sector investment to help North Macedonia tackle this problem, or is that market just really too small? How does it leverage the relationship with Greece or its Balkan neighbors to create a more attractive environment to leverage the DFC presence in Belgrade?
Well, I mean, I think you got to that right at the end there, Damon. The market has been so small, and even some of these projects, which, great projects on their own, but the size of the lots and the tenders are not necessarily the kinds of projects that would attract U.S. investment on their own. But as we approach the region from a broader perspective, we see the interconnections as they take it on in their own programs, and the government program specifically addresses a similar mixed and experience to those neighboring countries. I mean, what Ambassador Mustafa and Ambassador Godfrey were explaining were very similar challenges here in terms of moving off of lignite, opening up new sources of clean natural gas, and to some extent increasing the amount of renewables that are available to them. These can all be balanced, but for companies to be interested, and I think particularly in this case services, they want to be looking at the market as a whole and looking at the different markets as an integrated market, or at least compatible markets where their investments will have a bigger return. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see all of us excited to be working together as colleagues and counterparts, but also under this broader strategy, because that's going to be the best chance of success in terms of the region. And we've seen that in restructuring of the markets. If we apply it now in terms of having conversations with investors and companies, and we partner with the governments here to help them hold those conversations, I think there can be a real chance for progress.
Thank you. Let me turn to Ambassador Pyatt as we get close to closing out this with maybe two questions that you can help bring us home, Ambassador Pyatt, with. One, part of the objective you've had is to be in the wake of the Prespa agreement to really work with Athens, to work with Greece as a strategic partner of the United States for a strategy in the Balkans. Is energy one of those areas where Greece can play a leadership role working in Southeast Europe to promote diversification? And the second side of this is more complicated as you look south and east into the Eastern Med. We're talking at a time of great tension with Turkey and its maritime exploration. How do you see the U.S. role in helping to navigate or de-escalate these tensions that are escalating in the Eastern Med, which actually are an obstacle to seeing that region as an energy part of the energy solution? So those two questions to you to help bring us home, sir.
One is pretty easy because the answer is definitely yes. It's already happening. It was fascinating to me when I talked to the team at Hellenic Petroleum at Thessaloniki to see both the rail cars and the tanker trucks being loaded up to send refined products to their filling stations in Bulgaria, in North Macedonia. I asked them, who's your major competition in Bulgaria? It's Lukoil. So they're competing with Russian product. They're also producing and supplying Camp Bond steel in Kosovo. So you see that the Greek companies who are very nimble and very familiar with the Balkans are already quite active. And now all of this new infrastructure that we've been talking about is going to accelerate and catalyze that. And I think it will quickly address the pricing question that Anthony properly focused on. That's the reason why you see this huge shift in Greece to LNG as opposed to Russian piped gas, which generally comes in through very unfavorable take-or-pay contracts. So at least in Greece, we found great enthusiasm for diversification. The Eastern Mediterranean situation, as you say, is complicated. It's complicated by geopolitics. As Assistant Secretary Fannin said, we're very focused on trying to build this into being a driver of cooperation. And I was really heartened to see and hear the very strong message from Minister Hatzidakis about Greece's commitment to working with all of its neighbors, building on this solid foundation that we already have in trilateral relationships with Israel, with Cyprus, with Egypt. Greece's desire to see energy become a driver of cooperation for all of the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean littoral. Obviously, we've got some high politics and diplomacy, which is going to play out in the next few days as Secretary Pompeo makes a very important visit to Cyprus. And I think he is going to be very clear at that point in the United States' commitment to continued leadership, continued engagement, working with our European allies, and emphasizing the need to bring differences back to the diplomatic table and eliminate the situation which exists today, where there's a real risk of accidental military escalation. So we're gonna focus on the upside, the positive aspect of this. I'm extremely proud of how much we've accomplished in the 3+1 relationship between Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and the United States, where the Energy Working Group, led by Assistant Secretary Fannin and his counterparts, has been the most active of the follow-up mechanisms underneath that umbrella, and where we're now moving not just to talk about the big 35,000-foot geopolitics of energy, but also practical cooperation, cybersecurity for energy infrastructure, physical security for energy infrastructure, green energy, and how to manage what you pointed out is a very important European transition as part of the Green New Deal, which in the Greek case, it's important to note that Greece, as part of the European Recovery Initiative, is going to access 32 billion euros in new funding. And Prime Minister Mitsotakis has made clear that he expects a significant portion of that funding to be devoted to green energy projects. And I'm very hopeful that American companies, American technology and service providers will be part of that story. So I wouldn't be in this line of work if I wasn't an optimist. So I'm going to remain optimistic that we're going to be able to transform these energy issues, even in the Eastern Mediterranean, to being a driver of cooperation rather than conflict.
Ambassador Pyatt, and I think we did a sufficient job of picking up some of the questions that came in from our colleagues at ERT and Live Media. You covered them there. I appreciate that. I think I need to thank all of you for your time. I'm just so proud to have these individuals representing the United States and the region. Appreciate the work that you're doing in each of these countries, key partners of the United States. It's been an honor to see all of you virtually. I can't wait to see you in person. And thank you for the opportunity to moderate you. And if I am on cue, I'm going to follow Elias's cue and hand over, I believe, to Dr. Kostas Andriasopoulos, who's the chairman of the Energy Committee for the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, for our next panel. So I will cede the video floor.